I'm available for a call, but, we're going to talk on our terms. Last night, the President of the United States reached out to schedule a call. I appreciate this opportunity to discuss how we can protect.
We had a very good conversation. Mark called me today at 10 o'clock. We put out a statement. We had a very, very good talk. He's going through an election.
On Thursday, a crucial phone call took place between Prime Minister Mark Carney and U.S. President Donald Trump, marking their first direct conversation since the dramatic collapse of trade negotiations earlier in the month. Welcome viewers to my channel. If you're new here, please subscribe, like my video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. This was a highly anticipated event, as the diplomatic silence following the failed deal had deepened concerns on both sides of the border about the future of Canada-U.S. relations. The absence of high-level contact had created a vacuum of information and fueled speculation about the level of animosity between the two leaders. Described by the Prime Minister's office as productive and wide-ranging, the call signaled a formal reopening of dialogue and a willingness to move beyond the recent impasse. This kind of diplomatic language is carefully chosen. It is meant to convey a positive step forward without revealing any specific breakthroughs, thereby managing expectations for a domestic and international audience. The readout noted that the leaders delved into a variety of pressing issues, including current trade challenges, opportunities, and shared priorities. A spokesperson for the Prime Minister confirmed that Carney was the one who initiated the call, a deliberate diplomatic move that signaled Canada's proactive willingness to de-escalate tensions and reopen a crucial channel of communication at a time of significant economic and geopolitical uncertainty. By taking this step, Canada positioned itself as the stable, rational partner in the relationship, in stark contrast to the often unpredictable nature of the Trump administration's foreign policy. During their exchange, a key topic was Prime Minister Carney's proposal for a new economic and security relationship between Canada and the United States. This goes far beyond the immediate trade disputes and suggests a desire to establish a more stable, long-term framework for cooperation that addresses a wide range of shared economic and security concerns. Such a relationship might entail joint initiatives on everything from cybersecurity threats from state actors and the resilience of critical supply chains, e.g., semiconductors and rare earth minerals, to coordinated efforts on climate change and the defense of the Arctic. The two leaders also discussed how to build on President Trump's efforts to ensure long-term peace and security for Ukraine and Europe. This is a particularly significant point, as it directly relates to the ongoing U.S. initiative to secure support from its allies for providing security guarantees to Ukraine, a potential condition for any future peace deal with Russia. For Canada, a key member of both NATO and the G7, demonstrating solidarity with the U.S. on this front is a cornerstone of its foreign policy, and a unified front is essential in countering Russian aggression. The timing of this call was notable, as it occurred on the very same day that Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister, Anita Anand, was in Washington meeting with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio to discuss the evolving situation in Ukraine, a clear sign of coordinated diplomatic efforts on a critical international issue. The complexities and consequences of the trade war. This high-level phone call is set against a backdrop of deep-seated trade friction between two historically close allies whose economies have been deeply integrated for decades. The trade war, which has been simmering for months, began earlier this year when the Trump administration unilaterally imposed tariffs on Canadian goods. The White House justified these actions by claiming they were necessary to pressure Canada into cracking down on drug trafficking across the shared border, a justification that Canadian officials have repeatedly and publicly refuted as a thinly veiled pretext for protectionism and an absurd excuse for economic punishment. The imposition of tariffs on a close ally marked a significant and unprecedented departure from decades of established trade policy and has sent shockwaves through industries reliant on the cross-border flow of goods. The situation escalated dramatically in late July when President Trump raised the border-related tariff to a staggering 35%. This sweeping tariff applies to nearly every Canadian export to the U.S. that falls outside the specific provisions of the Canada-U.S.-Mexico Agreement, CUSMA. A slightly lower tariff rate was also put in place for specific commodities like energy products and potash. These tariffs are in addition to the highly damaging Section 232 tariffs that Trump previously levied on Canadian steel, aluminum, automobiles, and copper. Named after a section of the 1962 U.S. Trade Expansion Act, these tariffs are typically invoked on the grounds of national security. However, their application to Canada, a close military ally and partner in NORAD, has been widely seen as a politically motivated and unjustified abuse of the provision. The cumulative effect of these measures has been devastating, causing widespread disruptions to complex, integrated supply chains, leading to job losses in key manufacturing sectors in both countries, and creating significant economic uncertainty on both sides of the border. Canadian businesses and farmers, from dairy producers to steel manufacturers, have been hit particularly hard, while American companies that rely on Canadian inputs for their manufacturing processes, such as U.S. automakers or beverage companies, have also faced increased costs, threatening the profitability of their North American operations and ultimately hurting U.S. competitiveness. The breakdown of negotiations and conflicting narratives. The conversation between Carney and Trump follows the recent collapse of intense negotiations aimed at reaching a new trade pact. This effort was initially spurred by a bilateral meeting during the G7 summit that Canada hosted in Kananaskis, Alberta, earlier in the summer. During that high-stakes summit, with both leaders facing immense domestic pressure, they agreed to fast-track a new trade deal, setting an initial deadline of late July, which was later extended to August 1st. Despite the best efforts of negotiating teams working around the clock, a mutually agreeable pact could not be reached. The failure of the negotiations cast a pall over the normally friendly relationship, raising serious questions about whether a new agreement was even possible under the current political climate. Following the August 1st deadline, Canada's Minister of Trade, Dominic LeBlanc, offered a frank assessment of the situation, defending the Canadian government's decision to walk away from the table. He emphasized that Canada would not accept a deal that was not in the nation's best interests. "We have always said that we would not accept just any agreement. We would accept an agreement that was in the interests of workers in the Canadian economy." And at the end of the day, that agreement was not yet in sight, LeBlanc stated. This position highlights Canada's commitment to protecting its key economic sectors and workers, even in the face of intense pressure from its largest trading partner. The reference to the interests of workers is a key political message, suggesting Canada was resisting U.S. demands that would have undermined certain domestic industries, most notably Canada's supply management system for dairy and its cultural exemptions. In contrast, an anonymous White House official, speaking to CBC News, laid the blame squarely on Canada. The official claimed that a deal was not reached because Canada has repeatedly demonstrated a lack of seriousness in trade discussions as it relates to removing trade barriers. This statement reveals the deep chasm in perspectives between the two nations and suggests a fundamental disagreement over what constitutes fair and serious negotiation. The U.S. side likely views Canadian protections, such as supply management for dairy, intellectual property rights, and government procurement policies, as trade barriers that need to be removed to open up the Canadian market. In contrast, Canada views them as essential elements of its economic and cultural sovereignty necessary to protect Canadian jobs and industries. The ongoing impasse raises serious questions about when and if the two countries will be able to find common ground and move past the current trade hostilities. The phone call between Carney and Trump may be a step in that direction, but the deep-seated policy and philosophical differences on core issues remain, ensuring that the road to a new deal will be a long and difficult one.